Welcome back to another episode of the Cloud Native Now podcast. I am Sharon Florentine. I'm here with Mike Vizard, although I should probably start by saying bonjour, right? Although my French is non-existent. I took Spanish in school, but how's Paris? Living the dream.
Paris is lovely. We're here at the KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon Europe conference, and as usual, it's been chock full of stuff, so we can jump through it, but there's no shortage of things to talk about, that's for sure.
That sounds great. I've been jealous all week, so I can't wait to hear what you guys have been up to. I
All right.
know Wasm has been a huge focus, which is something we've kind of anticipated over the last year or so, right?
Yeah, let's jump in. Well, we'll start with Wasm. It's interesting times, right? It's still really early for this WebAssembly stuff, and it's a file format that lets you at least make it easier to build applications that you can write once and run anywhere, right? This is the original promise of Java finally realized some decade and a half later.
Years later, yeah.
But it's interesting conversation because here at the conference, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation has essentially two projects going on, but one is focused just solely on the runtime environment for Wasm, which they're arguing should be Kubernetes, and so there's an outfit called Cosmonic that built Wasm Cloud, and that helps you deploy that. The other is Fermion, which went a little step maybe wider and includes a development environment and deployment and management framework for managing this stuff end to end to create more of a serverless experience for Wasm that sits on top of Kubernetes. And they donated, or at least applied to donate, their SpinCube project to the CNCF, and we'll see how that plays out. But the other thing to keep in mind is there's this other group out there called the Bytecode Alliance that really drives Wasm itself, and they have both tools and projects for building apps and runtimes as well. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out between these two different consortiums with different projects going in different places. The upside is the hope is we're going to have a better developer experience for folks who are writing on Kubernetes platforms, because today it's, shall we say, hard. And as such, the number of developers that are writing to Kubernetes is probably somewhere south of 10 million, and there's probably an estimated 50 million enterprise developers out there. So that's 40 million people who are going, no. And so we got to make this a little more attractive to those folks who are used to frameworks that let them write at a higher level of abstraction, and they don't really want to know so much about the underlying infrastructure. I think even the 10 million or less that are writing to the platform are doing so under some form of, shall we say, duress, because there's a DevOps team somewhere that said thou shalt, and we're standardizing on this because it makes their life easier.
Right.
But so I think we have to get to more of the coalition of the willing, shall we say? And so part of the conversation here is how do we kind of do that? I think Wasm is going to be a piece of that puzzle, but this ongoing tension between developers and ops folks around Kubernetes has been with us for a little while now, and as far as I can see, it's going to be with us for a little while longer.
Yeah, it seems that way. And to your point about the tension between the two competing factions, we had a piece a month or so ago postulating that Wasm might be, the next evolution of what Kubernetes is supposed to be. And it definitely sounds like we are not there yet.
If you listen to the Wasm crowd, they're saying, faint praise for Kubernetes, but they're also pointing out that, Wasm can run anywhere. So you don't necessarily have to have Kubernetes, and a lot of them are kind of, wink, wink, nod, nod, going, well, maybe we'll be seeing these containers and Kubernetes platforms some other place, some other time, and we'll do something else. But it's not clear to me what that something else is just yet, because theoretically you could build a monolithic application, but microservices have some benefits that make it easier to maintain apps over the long haul, and apply, rip and replace kind of patches. So we'll see how this all plays out. There's still a lot of developers out there resisting microservices though, because they prefer monoliths because, well, from their perspective, they're just easier to work with. So yeah, we got a lot of, competing visions for the future.
Yeah, indeed. That brings me to another point. There was an end user technical advisory board. Am I correct there that the
Yeah.
CNCF announced today? How do you think that ties in with the complexity that folks are experiencing? Seems like that might help developers, cloud native or otherwise, at least be able to wrap their hands a little better around how to actually implement this stuff and get over that hump, maybe ease the duress a little bit.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things at work here. The board, which covers more than just Kubernetes, but has, so hopefully will be applied across, I don't know, what's CNCF today? It's the landscape has hundreds of projects in it. It's hard to keep track of all of them. Not all of them are all that mature. In fact, the ones that we call mature are still considered immature by others. So, well, there's clearly work to be done and I think part of the issue is that the feedback loop has been somewhat broken. So this board will create a loop for end users, including folks from Apple and Spotify and all these other folks who are leading edge users of this software, will have a channel to kind of communicate more directly with the maintainers of these projects about what their requirements are and what they need, which should help those folks prioritize some of their projects. Because a lot of times, let's be honest, there's still this kind of like the maintainers are like, well, I think this is cool. And then they kind of take a vote and away we go. But maybe we need to prioritize certain more mundane things that need to get fixed before we go on to the next big, great, cool thing that we all want to work on. And
Right.
so a little adult supervision here. That's what I would call it.
And that sounds like it is coming at exactly the right time.
Yes, maybe arguably overdue.
That's, yeah, or that. I was trying to be tactful. So, all right, I've got to bring the AI question into it. What's going on with AI that you've seen at the conference? Because that was kind of that was going to be the huge focus. Did that play out? What's going on?
Yeah, everybody was talking about AI. You almost think that there was nothing else going on in the world, but
Who knew?
but the issue is the data science teams that build these models are encountering the same issues that the developers are encountering, right? They're like going, this Kubernetes thing is hard. And so if you look at the major AI platforms run by the big cloud service providers and other entities, that have hundreds of software engineers, they're all running on Kubernetes because, it's a pretty ideal platform for that. But, as one of the fellows from Microsoft here point out, we got to make this easier. It's too hard. And if we don't make it easier, then we won't have enough models that people are willing to build and deploy because there's not enough engineering talent to go around. So, and we're kind of having this DevOps conversation all over again, right? We're trying to figure out how to make the data scientists play nice with the developers, who in turn play nice with the software engineers, so in turn talk to the IT operations people so that we can actually build and deploy these things in some sort of workflow. And I think I heard the word empathy, which is, DevOps code speak, maybe at least a half a dozen times over the last 2 days. So we're all trying to reinvent the wheel, and some people are calling for a new job title, surprisingly called the AI engineer. And if you swap out AI for DevOps, it's pretty much the exact same job.
That sounds very, very familiar. So, along with the cutting edge AI stuff, there were some Docker announcements, and that's kind of throwing it back right to the very beginning of containers and the spark that ignited cloud native.
Yeah, it was kind of funny to watch Docker and Red Hat get together and agree on something because, for so long that they have not always seen eye to eye. But there is an agreement that Red Hat OpenShift will support this test container cloud thing that Docker has, which is a cloud, it's a framework really for testing applications that'll accelerate that process and enables it to shift a little further left. But it was originally developed by Atomic Jar, and they got acquired by Docker, and now that's being brought together inside of this service. And I'm hopeful that maybe this will be exposed to other platforms as well. Ideally, we want, the applications to be higher quality, and the easier it is for developers to test stuff, the more likely that will occur. And I think we forget sometimes with testing, it's like, it's hard to create the test, it takes time. And if I'm behind schedule, the first thing I'm gonna maybe short shrift a little bit is those tests, because I'm gonna be like, well, maybe somebody else will do that later on, or I will tell myself that we'll fix it on the first patch update, whatever issue comes along. And, of course, by then I'm probably working on something else and I forgot about it anyway.
Mhm.
And I think we're going to see more testing. We just got to find a way to make it simpler and easier for folks to do, because no developer gets out of bed and says deliberately, I'm going to go build a crappy application today.
Right.
But, things conspire to kind of result in suboptimal experiences and performance and vulnerabilities and all these kind of issues. And I think, we all should just stop pointing fingers at each other and just say, look, the system is broken, and let's go figure out how to fix the system.
Indeed.
Mhm.
And, that brings AI back into the conversation, because AI is again being put forth as this is how we solve the testing problem. AI can create the tests, it can run the tests, it can figure out how to fix what the tests flag as flaws or vulnerabilities. But again, we got to get past that initial hurdle of how do we make it work and how do we integrate it into the workflow, and so many things.
And it will also rat you out for the test you didn't apply and the test that you missed or didn't address, because I can run a report that kind of identifies where there's issues in the code. So eventually you're going to have to fix it anyway. But hopefully there's a virtuous cycle somewhere in this whole thing that's going to emerge, but I'm not quite clear how long that's going to take.
Me either. Me either.
And then the most unusual, perhaps, but thing that we don't talk much about in terms of technology that was at the show that was worth checking out was Loft Labs, which makes this kind of virtual Kubernetes cluster.
Yep.
They partnered up with Rancher. And so now I can use the Rancher platform to manage all these virtual Kubernetes clusters. And the idea has been, to deal with the potential of Kubernetes sprawl, which is all these physical clusters. I can now take a cluster, a big one, and share it across multiple virtual Kubernetes clusters. And a lot of folks have been using that in pre-production environments for testing. And but some folks are now starting to deploy that in production environments, because they're like, I cannot manage all these physical Kubernetes clusters out there, and I need something that I can rip and replace when needed, and it's much more disposable. And because a lot of projects are short run maybe, or some things don't require as much processing power. In fact, the original Borg that was at the heart of Kubernetes, they envisioned these monster clusters that would be shared, and versus all these distributed clusters that we're currently seeing. I think there'll be distributed clusters at the edge, but in the data center itself and in the cloud, I think there's a lot of opportunity to save some costs and kind of not over provision Kubernetes clusters, because that's something we all like to do. And of course that has climate implications. But every
Right.
developer I met, is more terrified about the application being down and getting a call at 3 a.m. So they will over provision regardless of cost and sustainability concerns, because, well, who wants to be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah. Do you see more focus on the sustainability, or it's still just not there yet?
Well, folks were talking about it here, and this is Europe, where they pay a lot more attention to that issue
Yeah.
than you do in the US across the board. So it's definitely getting airtime. But I think ultimately it's going to be addressed as an extension of this FinOps effort. So now I'm going to have a program to monitor the cost. The cost is directly tied to consumption, which is tied to energy, which is tied to how much carbon we're kicking off. So I think that eventually all those things are going to move into one motion. It's just a level of maturity and providing the metrics that we need to track that alongside all the other metrics that we have. I'm kind of a big fan of, let's make all that stuff part of the DevOps workflow so we can see that as part of what we're doing versus having this kind of orthogonal thing over here where there's yet another platform that I already, I'm suffering whiplash from all the platforms I'm supposed to be looking at anyway.
Yeah, and it seems a lot of folks are thinking the same. Well, maybe not a lot. Off the top of my head, I have heard about at least 1 or 2 observability platforms that are integrating carbon footprint tracking into their existing platforms. So maybe soon, someday.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't think this in itself is going to solve global warming issues, but it's a big giant step in the right direction. And let's be honest, right? With AI and all this other stuff, we're kicking off more compute capacity than ever, consuming more power than ever. So a lot of this is like, excuse me, I would like to run about 50 more workloads than I'm currently running without getting called out by the climate police.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it is always a push and pull.
not to be overly cynical about it, but some of this is just kind of, shall we say, I prefer not to be climate shamed.
Yeah, yeah. That's true.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for the KubeCon report for those of us who could not attend. And yeah, what do you expect for the rest of the show?
Well, the show's wrapping up here, but I guess the next event is in Salt Lake City, and then the one back here in Europe will be in London next year. So we'll be looking forward to all those events. And hopefully, folks, if you go, come on by the Textron Group booth and say hello.
Yeah. And come back and chat with us again next week, folks. We'll be here. And thanks so much.
All right.
Team.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.